Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going somewhere totally different. We're going to be exploring spiritual treatment.
Sounds intriguing.
It is.
Mm.
And to make it even more interesting, our main source is actually an article from, get this, the Portuguese Wikipedia.
Ah, Wikipedia, not always the most reliable source, right?
That's the thing you might think, Wikipedia, really. But hear me out. It actually gives us a really great framework, a starting point. We're going to pull out the most fascinating threads, the surprising details, and then, well, explore what it all means.
I like it. So, what does the Portuguese Wikipedia have to say about spiritual treatment?
Well, it focuses on Brazil, which I think is really interesting.
Brazil, okay, a lot of spiritual traditions there.
Exactly. We're talking Spiritism, spiritualism, Umbanda. It's a whole world of traditions. And they use this term spiritual treatment to talk about practices that use, I guess you could say, a spiritual lens to address both physical and mental ailments.
So, not just about feeling good mentally or spiritually, but actual physical healing as well.
Right, exactly. And that's where it starts to get really interesting because the article explains how this approach differs from conventional medicine.
How so?
Well, it all comes down to, are you ready for this? Spirits.
Okay, I'm listening.
So in this context, spirits aren't just, something people believe in. They actually play an active role in healing. They can directly influence our well-being.
So it's not just positive thinking or the power of suggestion. We're talking about an actual spirit world that can have a tangible impact on our health.
Yes. And that's where things get really fascinating for me. Like,
Yeah.
how does this actually work in practice?
Well, the article highlights the role of mediums. They act as these intermediaries between the physical and spiritual realms, communicating with spirits, receiving guidance, even channeling their energy for healing.
Like a direct line to the spiritual world.
Exactly. It's wild, right? And they even give an example. Zé Arrigo, a Brazilian healer who supposedly channeled a spirit doctor named Dr. Fritz.
Wait, a spirit doctor?
Yeah. Apparently, Arrigo would perform surgeries with minimal instruments, and he attributed all his skills to Dr. Fritz, this spirit guiding his hand.
Wow. That just blows my mind as a spirit doctor. It really makes you think about, you know, what's possible, the boundaries of
It
belief.
certainly challenges our conventional understanding of medicine, that's for sure.
Speaking of challenging conventional thinking, the article also talks about how Spiritism views illness itself,
Hmm.
and it's not what you'd expect.
Ah, how so?
So they believe that illness often starts as an imbalance in our spiritual body, which then, kind of trickles down and manifests as a physical problem. It's like our bodies and spirits are totally intertwined.
So it's not just our physical bodies that get sick, but the spiritual counterpart as well.
Right. And they call this spiritual counterpart the paraspirit. It's like this spiritual double of our physical form, and it's constantly interacting with the spirit world.
Okay, so we've got spirits, mediums, and this paraspirit. What I'm really curious about is what are some of the actual treatments used in this approach?
Right. Well, get this. The article actually lists a whole bunch of them. Some might sound familiar, like the laying of hands, which can be found in lots of different cultures and traditions.
Yeah, that's one you hear about a lot.
And then there's fluid therapy, which I never heard of before. It's where they use water that's been, like, infused with spiritual energy for healing.
Infused with spiritual energy. How do they do that?
That's what I want to know. But it gets even wilder. They also have something called, are you ready for this? Homeopathic prescriptions from spirits.
Wait, hold on. Homeopathic prescriptions from spirits? You're kidding?
Nope. Apparently, mediums receive guidance from spirits about which homeopathic remedies will work for certain problems.
So it's like having a spiritual pharmacist on call. Wow. Okay, I am officially intrigued. We have to dig deeper into that.
We will. But first, I'm curious. I mean, how common are these practices really? Is this something people openly talk about? Or is it more of a, personal thing?
It's a great question, and I think it speaks to just how diverse these traditions really are. I mean,
Yeah.
some people are very open about their experiences and their beliefs, but for others, it's much more private.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It can depend on cultural norms or even just personal comfort levels where someone lives, all sorts of factors.
Right, right. It's like this whole other layer to healthcare that we're only just starting to uncover.
Exactly. And it's important to remember, these practices are often deeply intertwined with people's faith and their cultural identities.
Absolutely. Speaking of uncovering things, the article also mentions something called distance treatment. It's like healing, but it can be done remotely.
Right, exactly. The idea is that these mediums, they can act as conduits connecting with spirits to send healing energy across any distance.
So someone could be on the other side of the world, and still benefit from this.
That's the belief. Yeah.
That's incredible. It really makes you question, everything we think we know about how healing works.
It certainly challenges our conventional understanding.
It does. Okay, so we've talked about the positive side of things, but the article also delves into some practices that deal with, well, I guess you could say the darker side of spirituality. Things like antigoetia, which is all about undoing harm caused by, get this, spiritual attacks.
Yes, anti-Goetia. It's a fascinating example of how these traditions address the very real belief that, negative energies, negative intentions can be directed at someone and cause actual harm.
So it's like spiritual warfare.
In a sense, yes, it highlights this belief in a constant kind of push and pull between positive and negative forces in the spiritual realm and how those forces can impact us, our well-being.
That's not something you hear about every day. It makes you wonder about the limits of what we can really understand through science alone.
It certainly challenges us to consider possibilities that lie outside of our current scientific framework.
It does. And then there's apometry, which is where they use counting sequences to induce out-of-body experiences for healing.
Apometry, that's definitely one of the more complex practices described in the article. It involved these very specific techniques and rituals that are meant to achieve a heightened state of awareness.
It's like a spiritual exploration, but for healing.
Yes, you could say that. It really speaks to this idea that our consciousness, our very being, extends beyond our physical bodies.
Which brings us to, I think, the most intriguing practice of all, spiritual surgery. Now, this is where things get really wild.
Spiritual surgery, it's definitely pushing the boundaries of conventional medicine. It's based on this belief that spiritual entities can actually perform procedures, often without any physical incisions.
Yeah, the article mentions João de Deus, this Brazilian medium who is known for this type of healing. People would travel from all over the world to see him, hoping for miracles.
João de Deus, his story is fascinating and controversial. He claimed to channel numerous spirits, each with their own healing specialties, and he'd perform these procedures with his bare hands.
I mean, it's hard to even wrap your head around that from a scientific perspective.
It really is. It challenges everything we think we know about what's possible. And it raises questions about, the nature of belief, the placebo effect, the ethical considerations surrounding these practices.
Speaking of the placebo effect, that's something I wanted to touch on. The article briefly mentions it as a possible explanation for why some people seem to experience positive results from spiritual treatment. Can you elaborate on that a bit? What exactly is the placebo effect?
Sure, the placebo effect, it's this well-documented phenomenon where a person experiences a real benefit after receiving a treatment, but the treatment itself doesn't have any inherent therapeutic value.
So it's like the power of the mind influencing the body's ability to heal.
Exactly. And in the context of spiritual treatment, some researchers believe that the strong belief in the practice, combined with the social support that often comes with these communities, might be a factor in those perceived benefits.
That makes sense. If you believe something will help and you're surrounded by a supportive community, it makes sense that you might experience some positive effects.
Right. It highlights the connection between our minds, our bodies, and our social connections when it comes to healing.
So it's not necessarily that the spiritual treatment itself is doing nothing, but it's more nuanced than that.
Exactly. The placebo effect doesn't explain away every experience. It's just one piece of a very complex puzzle.
Right. It's about looking at things from multiple perspectives. And it does seem like the scientific community is becoming more open to exploring these alternative approaches to healing.
Definitely. There's a growing recognition that health and well-being are about more than just the physical body. This idea of a more holistic perspective, one that includes spirituality and belief, is something that could benefit a lot of people.
It's like we're at a crossroads where these ancient traditions and modern science are starting to intersect in really interesting ways.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is. And it makes you wonder what the future holds for our understanding of healing.
Absolutely. It's a journey of discovery for everyone involved, individuals and the medical community as a whole.
And like with any journey, it's about keeping an open mind, being curious.
Well said.
Now, before we wrap up, I did want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier about the ethical considerations surrounding these practices. I mean, it's one thing to talk about energy healing and spirit surgery, but there's also the question of, potential risks, challenges. How do we ensure things are being done responsibly?
Yeah, you're right. When you're dealing with practices that, let's face it, aren't always part of mainstream medicine, being ethical is super important.
So how do we even start to unpack the ethical side of all this? What are the main things we should be thinking about?
Well, I think a big one is vulnerability. People who turn to spiritual treatment, they're often hoping for healing, relief from suffering, and that can, unfortunately, make them more vulnerable to, well, let's just say people taking advantage.
Right, because when you're desperate for a cure, it's easy to believe anything that offers hope.
Exactly. So the practitioner's role is absolutely crucial here. They have a responsibility to make sure that anyone seeking treatment really gets it, understands the practices, the risks, and that they're making their own choice, not being pressured.
It's like informed consent, but in, I don't know, a much more complicated space, right?
Hmm.
Because you're dealing with spirituality, not just a straightforward medical procedure.
Absolutely. And because a lot of these practices aren't part of the usual medical systems, it can be hard to ensure accountability and ethical behavior.
So how do we balance giving people the freedom to make their own choices with protecting those who might be vulnerable?
That's the million-dollar question.
Hmm.
Uh, Honestly, I think it all comes down to communication. People need to feel like they can ask questions, get different perspectives, and make choices that feel right for them based on their own beliefs and values.
So a lot of it boils down to individual discernment, taking charge of your own healing journey.
Exactly. It's about finding what resonates with you, what feels right, both in your gut and ethically.
I like that. As we explore these alternative healing practices, ethics should always be a part of the conversation.
100%. It's not just about what we can do, but what we should do. We have to respect everyone's dignity and their right to make their own choices.
This deep dive has taken us on quite a journey. Ancient traditions, modern practices, spirit surgeons, the placebo effect. It's a lot.
It is, but isn't that what's so great about exploring new ideas? It challenges us, makes us think differently, and opens our minds to new possibilities.
Absolutely. And I think no matter how you feel about spiritual treatment, whether you're skeptical, curious, or a true believer, there's one thing we can all relate to: the human need to heal, to feel whole, to connect.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Well, this has been an amazing look into the world of spiritual treatment, a world where belief and healing come together in ways that are both fascinating and thought-provoking.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you and our listeners today.
And to everyone listening, as always, keep that curiosity alive, keep asking questions, keep diving deeper into life's mysteries. We'll see you next time.